Good afternoon and welcome to the Business Analytics Access tutorial. To begin this tutorial, we're going to open NYC Open Data, which you can see on my screen. We're going to begin by exploring and trying to figure out what two data sets we want to work with. I've decided that I'm going to be working with SAT and AP scores. As you can see, I have chosen tabular data and education, and I've searched SAT. I've chosen to work with the SAT College Board 2010 school level results. Now that I've chosen this, I need to export this data, and I'm going to do this using a .csv file. I'm going to choose to save this data, and now that will be saved into my computer. The next data that I've chosen to work with are AP results. So I'm going to go back where I've filtered using tabular data and education, and I'm going to search for AP. The data I'm going to work with is the AP College Board 2010 school level results. So again, I would export using a .csv file. Now that I have both of those downloaded, I'm going to begin to export them into Access. So as you can see, I have them both here. Here's my AP and also my SAT. And now I'm going to open a new Access blank database. I'm going to go to External Data, click Excel, and then I can begin to browse and look for the files that I'm looking to export. So I'm going to go to Browse. I had saved mine under Info Systems, and we're going to start with the SAT. So you need to click the first row contains column headings because the data that I am importing does contain column headings in the first row. And now I need to go through and make sure that every data type is correct. So for this one, the DBN does need to be text because there is a combination of numbers and letters in this field name. The next is going to be school name, which again does need to be text. Now we have the number of test takers, which is going to be integer. Then we have the critical reading, which is going to be text because as you can see here, we have a combination of numbers and letters. The same goes for mathematics as well as the writing mean. I'm going to choose my own primary key instead of letting Access do that for me, and I'm going to pick school name as my primary key. I'm going to rename this as SAT scores. As you can see, I now have a table within my Access database from the original data that I had downloaded off of the NYC Open Data. I'm just going to delete the dummy table that automatically comes when you open a new database here. And now I'm going to begin to import my AP scores. So I'm going to go right back into the same place, except this time use AP. So for this one, again, first row contains column headings. The DBN is again text. The school name is again text. For the AP test takers, however, we're going to use integer. For the total exams, we're again going to use integer. And for the number of exams with scores of 3, 4, and 5, I am going to use integer as well. Again, I'm going to choose my own primary key, and that is going to be school name. I'm going to rename this table to AP scores. Now we have two tables from the data NYC Open Data. I'm going to save and close out of both. So the next step is to make sure that we have the data types correctly, the field size, and the descriptions. So I'm going to begin with AP scores, and I'm going to switch this over to design view. So for the DBN, the field size we have is 255, which is the default. But for the DBN, I'm going to keep it to about 15 because there is nothing larger than that. For school name, I'm going to keep it to 100. And for the rest, the numbers, these are fine. So I'm going to save this. And I'm going to close out. Now we're going to look at the SAT scores in design view. For the DBN, I'm going to change it, as I did in the other one, to 15. For the school name, I'm going to keep it consistent with the other table, change it to 100. Number of test takers is fine. And then for the critical reading mean, the only possible scores are 3 digits. So I'm going to change each of these means. That switched over. Okay, each of these means to field size of 3. Now I'm going to save this. And it's also important to always throw in a description. So I'm going to begin to type in a few descriptions so you understand what I'm saying. So for the DBN, this is actually the district bureau number. And it's a code used by the Department of Education to track schools. Just entering a quick description like that for every field is a really good idea to make sure you're not confused and have a good idea of what's going on with your data. So I would go through and add a description for each of your fields. As you can see, I've gone ahead and entered a description for each of my fields. In the interest of time, I did it behind the scenes, but I do have a description for each one. For example, school name, name of the school where test scores were collected in 2010. I did do this for both tables. Now we're going to go ahead and look at my data dictionary that I have created. So the purpose of the data dictionary is to explain each field in your table. So as you can see, I have listed table, field, data type, and description. This is all really similar to what was in the design view, but it's good to have it over here too. So I went ahead and picked every field, wrote in their data type, and gave them a description. The next step was to come up with the purpose of my research. So the purpose I decided on was to see if there was a relation between SAT and AP test scores within New York City schools based on the research questions that I've come up with. My intended audience for this was the school administration and or teachers in the New York City area. You want to make sure that you're picking an audience that has an interest or a stake in the research that you are doing. Then I came up with a few research questions. I wanted to make sure that I was getting the most out of my data and tried to use as much of the information I had collected as possible. So the 5 research questions that I have come up with are: did schools with larger number of AP test takers do better on the SATs than schools with a fewer number of AP test takers? The next one was, is there a correlation between the number of AP test takers and the number of SAT test takers? For example, positive or negative, as one goes up, another goes up, one goes up, another goes down. The third was, is there a correlation between the number of AP exams with scores of 3, 4, or 5 and SAT scores over 500? Is there a stronger relationship between the number of AP exams with scores of 3, 4, or 5 at each school and SAT scores in one single category? For example, that could be critical reading, mathematics, or writing. And my final question was, did schools with no AP test takers have fewer SAT test takers than schools with large numbers of AP test takers? So as you can see, I've kind of got a brief outline of what I'm going to do in my research. And it's always good to have the data dictionary to go back and look at as a reference. The next step is to create relationships. We're going to go to Database Tools and Relationships and add both tables. We're going to drag school name to school name. And normally you would enforce referential integrity, but as you can see, it's not possible with this data. So we're just going to uncheck that and create this relationship. We want to save it before closing out. Now the next step is going to be to create queries to answer some of the questions that I identified with my data dictionary. So the first one that we're going to create, we're going to use Query Wizard. Simple Query Wizard to be more exact. And we're going to take, this one is about AP exam scores versus SAT exam scores. So we're going to take from the AP table, we're going to take the school name, the number of exams with scores of 3, 4, or 5, and then we're going to switch over to the SAT, and we're going to take the critical reading, their mathematics, and their writing mean. And we're going to name this query AP exam scores versus SAT exam scores. Finish. As you can see, we have a query built with only the information that we have selected. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to close out, and I'm going to begin to make one more query. This one's going to be exam scores versus SAT test takers to answer question 2. We're going to start by taking the school name, then we're going to take, again, number of exams with scores of 3, 4, or 5, then we're going to switch over to the SAT table and take the number of test takers. We're going to name this AP exam scores versus SAT test takers. Finish, and I'm going to save that before closing out. In the interest of time, I created the last 3 queries behind the scenes. As you can see, we now have 5 different queries to answer my 5 different research questions. The final step for this part of the business analytics project is to export your queries into Excel. I'm going to pick queries one by one and export them into Excel. I would like to save them into my information systems folder so that I can easily access them. I'm going to go ahead and save each individual one and make sure that they're saved in a place that I will be able to find them later. As you can see, I have exported them all into Excel and put them all in one Excel. So I have AP scores versus SAT scores, AP scores versus SAT test takers, and then my other 3 queries here. Now that that's done, I'm going to begin to run my analysis. As you can see, I have gone ahead and created a new Excel file. The tabs at the bottom represent the different analysis that I'm going to run. First, I had to pick 2 key variables that I wanted to work with. I chose SAT total exam mean and percent of AP exams passed. These were not variables I had originally downloaded, they were variables that I had created. I eliminated the data that didn't fit my overall purpose, and then I combined the 3 categories such as critical mean, mathematics, and writing to get an SAT total exam mean. I then took the number of AP tests that graded a 3, 4, or a 5. This is considered a pass by College Board, and I divided this by the number of test takers to get the overall percent of AP exams passed at that school. Now that I have these 2 variables, I'm going to do descriptive statistic analysis. Go to the Data tab, Data Analysis. This might not be on yours, you might need to turn it on. It's called the Data Analysis Tool Pack, but there's a different tutorial to teach you how to do that. So I'm going to click on Descriptive Statistics. My input range, I'm going to pick SAT exam means. And my output range, I'm going to put it as labels in the first row. My output range, I'm going to put it under descriptive in, sorry about that, bear with me. My input range, I've picked my SAT total exam mean. Labels in the first row, and now I'm going to pick my output range. I'm going to put this in my descriptive table, A1. Now I want to click Summary Statistics to make sure that I'm getting all the data. And I'm going to click OK. As you can see, I've been able to generate the mean, standard error, median, mode, standard deviation, and a lot of other useful information. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the percent of AP scores passed. So I'm going to go back to my key variables, click Data Analysis, Descriptive Statistics. My input range is now going to be the percent of AP exams passed. Labels in first row. My output range, however, this time, I'm going to pick right below this table. Summary statistics, okay. And again, we have mean, standard error, median, mode, standard deviation, and a lot of other useful information. For example, the range in the SAT total exam, that's important to note. The minimum and maximum, those are important to note. So as you can see through the descriptive statistics, a histogram was not generated. That's something we need to do additionally. So I'm going to go to Data, Data Analysis, Histogram. Our input range is the SAT total exam mean. I'm going to leave the bin range and let Excel generate the bins for me. In my output range, I'm going to have right here, and then I'm going to make sure you've clicked Chart Output so that the histogram is actually put on the Excel. Here you go. Here's my histogram. And then we're going to do it again for the percent of AP exams passed. So we're going to highlight those. Then we're going to let Excel do the bin range again. Output range, going to put it down here with this. Chart output needs to be clicked. Okay. Now we have two histograms generated for both of my key variables. And finally, the descriptive statistics part of this portion is done. The next step is to compare your two key variables across different groups. There was no particular groups in my research, so I decided to create a group. I did this by using an if statement. My if statement looked something like this. So if, and then I selected the percent of AP exams, was greater than or equal to 58. 58 is not some random number. That is the national average for passing in 2010 according to College Board. So 58, if it's true, above. If it's false, below. Now I'm going to go ahead and drag this down. Now I have two different groups that I can compare across, below and above average AP pass rate. I'm going to go ahead and create a pivot table. You do this by going to Insert, Pivot Table. And I want to put it in my existing worksheet, and I'm going to pick a location very close to where I left off. Now that the pivot table is created, I need to decide where to put what. So I'm going to take the SAT total exam mean and put it in values. But I don't want to just keep that there. I'm going to go to the value field setting, and I'm going to create average. For the report filter, I'm going to put comparison to the AP pass rate. As you can see, my pivot table right here, I can click above and have the average of the schools, SAT scores for the schools with above AP pass rates, or I can click below. I could also put in my school name for row labels, and that way when I have above or below, I can look at the schools that scored that way, and the grand total here at the bottom would be the average of those schools. But I'm just going to go ahead and leave that out. So now that I've created a pivot table, the next step is an ANOVA. I'm going to go to the next tab to begin this. In my Comparison ANOVA tab, you will notice that I have created the two groups based on the if statement that I had used in the Comparison Pivot Table tab. I want to compare the SAT scores across these two groups, and I'm going to do that using ANOVA. So the first step in doing so would be to go to the Data tab, Data Analysis, ANOVA Single Factor. My input range, I'm going to select all of the data. labels in first row, and I want my output range to be right here, and I'm going to press OK. So as you can see, I have now generated an ANOVA table, and the important numbers to look at here is the p-value. And my p-value is less than the 0.05, which means there is a relationship that exists between these two key variables. The next step is to do a correlation. To do this, I have already copy and pasted my two key variables into the correlation tab. Now I'm going to go to Data tab, Data Analysis, Correlation. My input range is going to be my two key variables. Labels in first row, and my output range I'm keeping on this worksheet. Okay, now you can see that my correlation coefficient is greater than 0, in between 1 and 0, which means that these two variables have a positive correlation. That is that the SAT total exam mean and the percent of AP exams correlate positively. The next step is going to be to create a scatter plot to just really reinforce this idea. So I'm going to go into Insert, Scatter, and click Scatter. As you can see, I have the scatter plot with the SAT mean exam score on the y-axis and the percent of AP exams passed on the x-axis. There is an increasing trend with this scatter plot if you look from the left to the right. The next step is going to be to run a regression. So I'm just going to go to the regression tab. As you can see, I've already copied and pasted my two key variables, and I also have another variable, which is above average AP pass rate. The way this variable was generated was using an if statement. It was the same if statement from back in the comparison pivot tab, but instead of having above or below, I had 1 for above and 0 for below. You may notice a lot of zeros in the percent of AP exams passed column. This is not due to the schools not reporting their results. The 0 is actually reflecting that the students have not passed exams at that school, meaning they got either a 1 or a 2 on that certain AP exam. Now we're going to run the regression. We're going to go to Data, Data Analysis, and we're going to find our way down to Regression. I want my input Y range to be SAT total exam. And I want my input X range to be percent of AP pass and above average AP pass rate. Labels needs to be checked, and I'm going to have my output range on this same sheet. All that's left to do is press OK. As you can see, the regression table is now generated. We have two variables right down here with their corresponding coefficients, and that is how you run a regression test. So you have come to the end of the business analytics tutorial. You have learned how to run descriptive statistics, including histograms, create a pivot table, run an ANOVA, as well as correlation and a scatter plot, as well as regression, which is what we had just done. So thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you learned a lot. This Access tutorial was created by Shannon Heath for Professor Yim's Information Systems class at Fordham University, Gabelli School of Business. Thank you for watching.